Charlie Kirk, founder of Turning Point USA, has been assassinated. He was shot in the neck while speaking at an event for students at Utah Valley University. We're still waiting for more details, but I'm going to go into what we know so far. I'll be talking more about this today and a lot more. I'm the Epoch Times senior investigative reporter Joshua Phillip, and you're listening to Crossroads. Welcome to Crossroads. First off, terrible news, more of it. Charlie Kirk, founder of Turning Point USA, he was assassinated at an event in Utah. Charlie was shot in the neck. He was speaking at an event for students at the Utah Valley University. We're still waiting for more details on this. There have been reports about shooters arrested. They keep getting released. They're not the ones. The shooter is currently still at large. This is what we know so far. A single shot was fired at Charlie Kirk at approximately 12:10 p.m. local time. This was again while he was speaking at the university as part of his America Comeback Tour. Utah Governor Spencer Cox and other authorities are saying that the shooter wore dark clothing. Initially, they said fired from the roof of a building at the university campus that was a, quote, longer distance shot. Newer reports coming out are saying they found the gun in a wooded area. It's not clear whether the individual dropped it off there or shot from there. We're still waiting for details. Now, according to FBI Director Kash Patel, a subject in the shooting was initially arrested, questioned, then released, was not the guy. A lot of the initial reports about the older man, he was not the shooter. A second suspect was also taken into custody, but was also released after being cleared. It was not the shooter. Again, the shooter is still at large. Now, as of this morning, the FBI said it has discovered the weapon that was allegedly used. It was a high-powered bolt-action rifle. Again, we don't have many more details on this. There was an allegation going around from Steven Crowder that he had a letter on it. It's important to note the letter he got detailing information about the gun was before the FBI said they found the gun, so we don't know how accurate it is. I don't want to spread rumors on it, but that's where things are at. Allegedly also, there is footage of the perpetrator, but they're not yet releasing it. We'll get more details on this, and of course, we'll see where it goes. But President Donald Trump also spoke about this in an address.
To my great fellow Americans, I am filled with grief and anger at the heinous assassination of Charlie Kirk on a college campus in Utah. Charlie inspired millions, and tonight, all who knew him and loved him are united in shock and horror. Charlie was a patriot who devoted his life to the cause of open debate and the country that he loved so much, the United States of America. It's a long past time for all Americans and the media to confront the fact that violence and murder are the tragic consequence of demonizing those with whom you disagree day after day, year after year, in the most hateful and despicable way possible. For years, those on the radical left have compared wonderful Americans like Charlie to Nazis and the world's worst mass murderers and criminals. This kind of rhetoric is directly responsible for the terrorism that we're seeing in our country today, and it must stop right now. My administration will find each and every one of those who contributed to this atrocity and to other political violence, including the organizations that fund it and support it, as well as those who go after our judges, law enforcement officials, and everyone else who brings order to our country. Charlie was the best of America, and the monster who attacked him was attacking our whole country. An assassin tried to silence him with a bullet, but he failed because together we will ensure that his voice, his message, and his legacy will live on for countless generations to come. Today, because of this heinous act, Charlie's voice has become bigger and grander than ever before, and it's not even close.
My condolences, and from my team here at the Epoch Times, really condolences out to Charlie Kirk and his family. This is horrible news. I knew Charlie personally. In fact, I was supposed to be speaking at an event with him just last weekend, which I unfortunately had to cancel. This is horrible news. Really. On that note, also, though, President Donald Trump is noting that he will be launching his own investigations at the federal level, looking into the organizations that have been framing these false narratives that have been dividing the United States. How are people being labeled as Nazis in the alt-right and the far-right? How are people labeled and investigated? How have media been falsifying reports, spreading fake news, and then using their fake news to go after people and their families, which result in calls for violence and acts of violence? The problems we're having across the United States, much of it is being spurred on by false narrative. People being convinced that there are neo-Nazis out there trying to get them, people being convinced that anybody who believes in free speech or just traditional values is somehow an enemy of democracy. All of these fake narratives that have turned people against each other being spurred on by somebody or some organizations or some media. There are now federal investigations, at least according to Trump, looking into this, beginning to investigate it. I can announce right now, too, that I'm going to be investigating this. I am going to be investigating this, and I will find out how these false narratives started, who did them, how they were spread, how they were falsified, and we're going to be exposing all of this. Notably on Charlie Kirk, the first major falsifications of him began with Media Matters, going back to 2017 after the Charlottesville clash between the far right and between Antifa. You might remember that President Donald Trump was falsely framed by the media when they took one of his quotes out of context, claiming there were fine people on both sides. What Trump actually said, because they actually edited his clip to not include his full statement to frame that fake narrative. President Trump actually condemned the extremes on both sides, but said there were also good people there just there to join the event. Trump did, in fact, condemn the extremes on both sides. He actually condemned the quote-unquote alt-right, and he condemned the Antifa people there who were also starting the violence. Trump condemned both extremes. And the media then used that fake narrative to go after many people, including Charlie Kirk. From there on, we of course saw how those narratives developed. 2017 onward, the past decade of false framing, false news stories being used to start criminal investigations, being used to go after people using grassroots movements, calls to violence, mass protests, organized movements, nonprofits backing these things, and fake media pushing it along the entire time. This is now under investigation again, at least according to Trump, and under investigation by myself. We will be looking into this. Terrible news. Again, my condolences to Charlie Kirk and his family. Horrible news. Terrible day for this country. But again, I believe that things will turn around. It seems what Trump is doing, he wants to make Charlie Kirk a martyr, the beginning of something, not the end of something. And that beginning of something will be, I believe, a return of what Charlie Kirk stood for, which is peaceful rhetoric. The ability of people of opposing viewpoints to come together and have an actual discussion. And also what stood against him, a falsified narrative. People spurred into hatred, believing that violence is the solution. That is what will come to an end in this country, I believe, once the smoke clears. Now, also on the topic of violence right now, the federal government has stepped in to charge DeCarlos Brown Jr. with the murder of Irina Zarutska. This is on the train in Charlotte, North Carolina. And as the murder of this young woman is quickly turning into a broad rejection of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and also on these light on crime policies across the nation. This is also a deep inflection point for the country right now. Let me show you first the official announcement from the Department of Justice. It says a federal criminal complaint was filed in U.S. District Court in Charlotte today, charging DeCarlos DeJohn Brown Jr., a 34-year-old, with a federal crime in connection with the fatal attack of Irina Zarutska on the city's light rail system. It says that Brown is charged with one count of committing an act causing death on a mass transportation system. And it's on August 22nd, 2025, at approximately 9:55 p.m., officers with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department responded to a call for service related to an assault that occurred on the Lynx Blue light rail line in Charlotte. It says callers indicated that a woman had been stabbed by a male. It says responding officers located the victim inside the rail car. The victim, subsequently identified as Irina Zarutska, had sustained fatal stab wounds. They again aren't saying how many stab wounds, but plural, meaning he stabbed her more than once. It says a pocket knife and other items were collected from the scene. Investigators reviewed surveillance footage that showed the victim entering the light rail car and sitting down in the row in front of Brown. Approximately 4 minutes later, Brown pulled a knife from his pocket and unfolded it before striking the victims, it says, 3 times from behind. Following the attack, it says Brown walked away from the victim, and it says responding officers located Brown on the light rail platform and he was arrested. They say, quote, the brutal attack on an innocent woman simply trying to get to her destination is an attack on the American way of life, said U.S. Attorney Russ Ferguson. And they said, of course, crimes like this affect the victim the most. Irina deserves justice, and we will bring justice to her and her family. It says, but crimes like this also affect everyone who relies on mass transportation to get to and from work and go about their daily lives, and federal charges are necessary to protect the public and ensure confidence in our transportation system. It notes that if convicted, Brown faces a maximum statutory sentence of life in prison or death, possibly the death penalty. It says ultimately his sentence will be determined by the court based on the advisory sentencing guidelines and other statutory factors. Now, on this point, we're not clear what his motives were. We do know that Brown was walking around the train stating, quote, I got that white girl. And there are now investigations also. Was he racially motivated? And another big question is what might have racially motivated him to kill a white girl and then declare, I got that white girl? Maybe we'll find out as a country. But we do know this. False narratives, hateful narratives have been widely spread by the mainstream media, condemning white people as being historically responsible for all the problems in the world. They've been basically maligned, targeted, defamed. You have people who've been brainwashed with violent rhetoric, telling them that violence is even acceptable. In fact, the Black Lives Matter account, right before this took place, even publicly declared that violence is somehow a solution to the white problem. These kinds of narratives would have been filling the heads of people across the country, filling the heads of students being educated in school with this false, hate-filled rhetoric. News outlets like the New York Times have falsely framed this using their 1619 project, falsified they knew it was fake because their own fact checker said so, still allowed to be adopted even into public school education, where children have been raised for the past decade almost, being taught false history, framing white people as the enemy. This is the kind of rhetoric, this is the kind of narrative that is resulting in violence across the United States and is now being exposed. Now, in response to the charges, Brown Jr. has also spoken publicly. He is alleging that he was given a substance. This is his claim. He says a substance was given to him and used to control him. It seems he believes he was not in control of himself. He alleges, again, that something else was controlling him at the time of the killing. That is his personal statement on that. My own take on that, I would imagine that his defense is going to be around mental illness. If he's claiming that a mental illness, which I believe it was, is causing him to not be in control of himself. And his allegation on that front will likely put the issue at the forefront of how the country should handle insane people who present a danger to themselves and a danger to others, especially when they commit horrific crimes like this, murdering an innocent young woman in cold blood. It also comes amid a broader discussion in the country on whether we need to bring back insane asylums. Should people like this be thrown in insane asylums? Should they be allowed to wander the street if a judge says, hey, you're too mentally ill to stand trial? What do you do with people like that? It's a real serious question the country's going to have to address. It's also, I think, very likely that his case could be the one to seriously launch this debate into action, because President Donald Trump is now talking about clearing the way to allow for mental institutions to come back. We'll see how that goes. The case is also drawing increasing commentary from President Donald Trump and others. A new statement from President Trump says, quote, "The animal who so violently killed the beautiful young lady from Ukraine who came to America searching for peace and safety should be given a quick, there is no doubt, trial and only awarded the death penalty. There can be no other option." Trump is saying again that Brown Jr. should face the death penalty for the murder of this young woman. Now, in terms of the broader debate starting now, this also goes beyond just this one murder. This is becoming a rallying call all across the United States of similar murders that have been taking place, oftentimes involving repeat criminals who've been let off the hook by these light on crime policies. These district's attorney who weigh things based on the color of people's skin and do so even publicly, who state that there are too many people of one color in prison and so they want to reduce that prison population. Non-governmental organizations, NGOs getting funded and pushing for these types of policies. Individuals publicly declaring that this is their agenda and then financing the campaigns of people who represent those agendas. Again, a race-based narrative that is resulting maybe in harsher punishments against some people against their race and lighter punishments against others, mostly framed around the black and white narrative. People saying there are too many black people in prison and so you should not put as many in prison, resulting again in a racial, really, discrimination of how they weigh the crimes. Now, what's happening in this country is also this case is beginning to unravel a lot of the race narratives and agendas that were until now being used to justify these policies. Vice President J.D. Vance said this on X. He said, "The big lie the Democrats told about violent crime is that it's systemic and therefore no one's really responsible. This individual not responsible, the system was mean to him because of his race." J.D. Vance says, "If the system is to blame, then you fund a bunch of nonprofits that don't do anything besides give jobs to unqualified radicals." He said, "The reality is the gross majority of violent crime is committed by a very small group of people, and we should be throwing them in prison." Now, on that point, some people have taken J.D. Vance's statement out of context, claiming that J.D. Vance is making a racial statement here. The deeper context is he's pointing to people who are repeat criminals. One thing that's being noted now publicly is that most murders are committed by people who have over 10 or even 11 repeat crimes. People who've been let go over and over and over again, and they go on to commit murder. The majority of murders in the United States are committed by repeat criminals like this. Again, oftentimes with the minimum of 11 prior convictions. That's what J.D. Vance is referring to. Elon Musk also responded to J.D. Vance saying, quote, "Yes, what it comes down to is this. Do you have more sympathy for those highly likely to commit murder or more for those at risk of being murdered? If the former, you are a disgusting human being, and yet so many on the radical left choose this." Again, some people are framing this as a race narrative. The deeper context of polling and videos they're pointing to is that they're talking about repeat criminals. The media is lying about it yet again. Jesse Waters at Fox also detailed something else. He noted the court system that repeatedly released the accused killer. Again, he had 14 prior arrests. The system that repeatedly released this individual in the streets was heavily run by DEI policies.
This is Teresa Stokes, a Harris donor who doesn't even have a law degree, but just made a career criminal and a schizophrenic who beat his own sister when he was out on parole. Pinky promised that he'd behave. Ms. Stokes wasn't elected. She was nominated by the clerk. In Mecklenburg County, the sitting clerk is Alyssa Chin Gary. On her LinkedIn page, she calls herself a clerk and a DEI consultant and a racial equity organizer. And her life mission? Reparations.
We are here to honor them, to lift their names, and to continue the intergenerational work that we are required to do to eliminate structural racism.
Ms. Stokes was nominated by Judge Carla Archie. Judge Archie is friends with Eric Holder, Obama's wingman. And Judge Archie isn't just any judge. In 2019, she was the DEI Champion of the Year. Is this starting to make sense? Did a woman die because of DEI? Just a couple months ago, a guy shot 5 people on New Year's. And Judge Archie sentenced him to 1.5 years for shooting 5 people. 1.5 years. This is a DEI court, and they have blood on their hands. And if the people in robes are on the same side as the bad guys, that's suicide. Are you okay with the country committing judicial suicide? I'm not. DEI died when Kamala lost. It's illegal. And releasing felons with dozens of arrests for social justice is a crime against the country. They've set up these dangerous DEI courts in cities nationwide, catching and releasing criminals to prey on innocent people. These courts need to be systematically dismantled, and that needs to happen immediately.
Now that's big. All those DEI policies, again, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which was effectively racism under the banner of anti-racism. What they were going for was a type of discrimination to, quote unquote, end discrimination, but by doing so, they institutionalized discrimination. All those DEI policies, all those narratives we've been fed for more than a decade, all those school re-education programs, all the forced trainings for police, the forced corporate trainings, the forced government worker trainings, the onslaught of race narratives from the media, this entire system being driven again by DEI, and the, again, forcing of the American mind to recognize what was a fake narrative the entire time. That entire fake narrative is now falling apart. Hatred and discrimination and racism under the banner of fighting it. The people pushing that were the biggest racists in this country, and it's now coming to the surface. People are fed up. We're not going to have it anymore. The real institutionalized racism was through DEI. DEI is institutionalized racism. DEI warped the minds of children in schools being fed these false narratives. DEI institutionalized racism through false trainings being given to people all across the country, within government agencies, within businesses, even forced on police officers who had to sit through their trainings. This entire culture of racism forced on the United States using false narratives under the false banner of what it actually claimed to oppose. It is now falling to pieces. People are sick of it, the truth is coming out, and it's unraveling. Vice President J.D. Vance also posted now historical still of the young woman crying after she was stabbed right before she collapsed to the ground and died on that train. A horrible photo that will go down in history. And Vance wrote this. He said, Daniel Penny prevented this from happening on a New York City subway. Referring again to Daniel Penny, who alongside at least 2 other men restrained an insane man who was threatening to kill people on a subway. The man died who they restrained. Daniel Penny was charged with murder. He was found innocent. He did not do it. But J.D. Vance says this, instead of thanking him, many hated him for it. And that's raising the question again, did nobody step in to help this young woman because they were afraid of being treated like Daniel Penny? A real serious question to ask. This raises the important point, why do people not seem willing to stand up and help victims like they used to? Why do people, when violent crimes are taking place, seem to be more inclined to record it on their cell phones than step in to help? What are we becoming? Well, the case of Daniel Penny is also becoming a key narrative on that. When a group of men again stepped in to stop a man who was threatening violence, the man did die. But Daniel Penny again found innocent, but before that had his reputation utterly destroyed by fake news outlets, utterly destroyed by racist commentators framing him as the bad guy because of the color of his skin. And again, Daniel Penny was the one who faced charges, although again, he was found innocent. The murder of Irina Zarutska is also raising a broader conversation about repeat criminals who often go on to commit even worse crimes if they're not put in jail and then kept in jail. Part of the reason why we have a prison system is to prevent people from being victimized by criminals. And the video is making rounds on this from 2023, right? This is former DC Police Chief Robert Conte back in 2023 talking about the real problem.
guns off the street. What we got to do, if we really want to see homicides go down, is keep bad guys with guns in jail, because when they're in jail, they can't be in communities shooting people. So when people talk about what we're going to do different, or what we should do different, what we need to do different, that's the thing that we need to do different. We need to keep violent people in jail. Right now, the average homicide suspect has been arrested 11 times prior to them committing a homicide. That is a problem. That is a problem.
Now that raises some really important points. If murders are often committed by people who have 11 at least prior convictions, 11 prior arrests or 11 prior incidents, isn't that why we used to have 3 strike laws? Wasn't that the reason why 3 strike laws were put in place? 3 felonies, you're facing 25 to life. That was the reason. It was made to be so that people like this individual who went and murdered a young woman on a train, seemingly for no reason at all other than racial hatred, which he publicly declared as he marched around the train, blood dripping from his hands. That is why we used to have 3 strike laws, to make sure that if somebody shows a willingness to repeatedly violate the law in serious terms, again, felonies, right? 3 felonies. You put them in jail for 25 to life so they don't continue harming innocent people. This is why bail exists in the first place, something also being turned around because of race narratives. The racists pushing racist policies under the fake banner of fighting racism, gaslighting the entire country. The racists leading the flag on racism around the entire country, putting it in the media, shoving it at the heads of children, and then forcing us to deal with crazy, violent people everywhere we go. It is these individuals who I believe are really responsible for this, as Trump is even saying himself. Now, a key quote going around is actually from Adam Smith, and it's this: "Mercy to the guilty is cruelty to the innocent." One of the main reasons why we have law enforcement, one of the main reasons why police exists, as opposed to the defund the police movement, which has also been spurred on by this, subjecting innocent people and young women like this to murderers, to hatred, to violence, and to threats. This entire movement that has torn the country apart for the last decade. Again, we'll find out what caused this, what news outlets are responsible for it, what NGOs have been pushing it, how these false narratives have swept across our nation, and how individuals and who they are have forced this into the public mind and then used it politically. You're watching right now the beginning of an unraveling of a radical movement that has swept across the United States and kept us pinned down under these false narratives. The truth is now coming out, and I believe the country is at a turning point, as Charlie Kirk may have represented. Now, look, in other news, something else big happened. Pharmaceutical companies are facing new restrictions on what type of advertisements they can show on television. And this follows a new executive order from President Donald Trump. Let me show you this. This is HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and he's explaining Donald Trump's new executive order.
The president just signed an executive order that's an historic change in the way that pharmaceutical advertising is done on television. And the order basically reinstates, or gives us now the opportunity to reinstate the 1997 rules. Prior to 1997, pharmaceutical advertisers were required to put all the side effects on their ads. Many of them didn't advertise because it lengthened because of what it did to the length of the advertising. And that the removal of that requirement in 1997, FDA changed the rule to allow them to report the side effects on a website or on a telephone. And they only had to report a few of them on television. And that triggered a proliferation of these ads. There's only 2 countries in the world that allowed direct-to-consumer advertising by pharmaceutical companies on television. We're one of those countries. New Zealand is the other. It's had a disastrous impact on human health, on people's relationships with their doctors, and really on the entire gestalt where Americans are led to believe that there's a pill for every ill.
Now, that's a big deal. As RFK notes, this basically restores the rules back to where they were before they were changed in 1997. And what this does, it requires pharmaceutical companies to disclose and say all of their side effects of their drugs when they advertise them, not just a few. And what this means is the public will be properly told, this is what else this drug will do to you. A lot of them have very wild side effects, including crazy things like suicide ideation and violent tendencies, raising other questions, for example, of, are some of these violent incidents in the United States being caused by the medicines people are being given? Another investigation they're launching right now, by the way. Now, as RFK also states, he says America is one of just 2 countries in the entire world that even allow for pharmaceutical companies to advertise directly to consumers like this in the first place. Why do we do it? Also, just following the announcement, the FDA sent a warning letters and also cease and desist orders to drug makers who've been doing this. And again, this is based on the new executive order. News Nation said this: the Food and Drug Administration launched a crackdown on misleading pharmaceutical advertising on Tuesday, sending thousands of warning letters and approximately 100 cease and desist letters to drug companies. It says the FDA will also initiate rulemaking to eliminate so-called adequate provision loopholes created in 1997, which allowed drug companies to provide only brief safety warnings in broadcast and television advertisements while directing consumers to websites or phone numbers for complete risk information. Now, this is going to radically change the types of pharmaceutical advertisements you see, because instead of having risks might include sudden death, heart failure, suicide ideation, other problems, consult your doctor, they're going to have to go a lot longer listing all of the side effects and everything that thing might do to you, properly telling the public the actual effects of what they do, fixing allegedly one tiny problem and causing a whole lot of others. We'll see how that affects the advertising. Now, this new order also appears to immediately go into effect because, as we see, the Trump administration is currently, as we speak, sending out these cease and desist letters. Also, something else big happening right now. Back to the topic of crime across the United States. The Drug Enforcement Agency, the DEA, they just launched a nationwide operation to arrest members of the Sinaloa drug cartel. And these cartel operatives were operating within the United States. Many have now been arrested. The New York Post said this: a massive nationwide crackdown on the deadly Sinaloa cartel has culminated in more than 600 arrests, officials say. It says the big swoop included 171 suspects in New England as part of a week-long operation that targeted one of the world's most powerful drug trafficking organizations, according to officials. It says the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, announced Monday that from August 25th to 29th, agents arrested 617 people with ties to the cartel across 23 field divisions in the U.S. It says the enforcement action, billed as a DEA surge, also netted a massive haul of drugs, firearms, and cash. It says among the seizures, 480 kilograms of fentanyl powder, 2,209 kilograms of methamphetamine, 7,469 kilograms of cocaine, 16.5 kilograms of heroin, more than 714,000 counterfeit pills, which, by the way, they sometimes even lace with fentanyl, killing young people in the country. It says they also got 420 firearms and $11 million in cash. Big update on that. Again, that will probably be the beginning of something, not the end of it. The drug cartels very actively do operate in the United States, especially with the decriminalization of marijuana. Many of them move their operations stateside. As drugs have become decriminalized, as it's been allowed, many of the cartels no longer fear repercussions, and so they move their operations within the United States. Important to note, oftentimes the cartels will work as the higher levels of street gangs. They again provide the drugs to the gangs, which work as the distributors. They then hand it to the lower level, operatives, people selling and so on just your street corners and so on. This is part of a larger market in the United States being spurred on by violent criminal organizations, which are now officially labeled as terrorist organizations. And we will likely see more operations like this because I personally know, talking to law enforcement officers across the country, the cartels even have bases set up in many parts of the United States, threatening witnesses, targeting people, the whole 9 yards. Even when people are arrested, sometimes cartel lawyers come in, put on their cowboy boots and, cartel hats, go in, represent their clients, come out, even take photos of jury members. We'll see how this goes, but it does seem the Trump administration is taking this seriously. Finally, the United States is taking this seriously, and we'll see where it goes. That said, everybody, big updates not next week, but the week after. I'll be speaking at events in San Diego, but next week I'm going to take a week off. I'm going to go visit family in California, so we will not have programs next week. We'll be back on again the following week, and also the following week, I'll be doing events September 24th and 25th in the San Diego area. The first one is going to be in San Diego, Wednesday, September 24th. The second is going to be in Orange County, Thursday, September 25th. So if you want to come to the event, again, I'll be speaking out there. We'll do a live Q&A and so on. The website for that is epochsd.com, epochsd.com. Go there, sign on, come to the events, and again, looking forward to seeing y'all. That said, everybody, let's jump into questions, comments, anything you want to talk about, leave it in the chat. Let's have a discussion. First off, from Judy Akim, you're saying whether systemic exists or not. You're talking about this whole systemic racism and other thing narrative in the U.S. You're saying whether it exists or not is not an excuse for crime. I say maximum time, maximum accountability, maximum therapy. If anyone wants to be compassionate, they do it in a safe way. If not, they just want chaos. Yeah, that's important too. I've reflected on the proper nature of law enforcement. And a lot of people talk about how, compassion for the criminal is being compassionate. We oftentimes forget about the nature of why law enforcement exists. Part of it is also compassion for the victim, right? A large amount of it is that. Part of it is also compassion for the family of the victim, who are victims by extension. The other part is crime prevention, giving people an incentive to not commit crime in the first place. And the other thing is, look, mentally stable people often don't commit crimes. That's the other side of it. The whole narrative around mental instability and mental health when it comes to crime, I would argue if somebody has 11 prior convictions, they probably have something wrong with them. They probably have mental problems. And if the baseline of, when people commit murder is usually when they have at least 11 prior convictions, that tells me that most people who are murderers probably have something wrong with their heads. Do we just let all the murderers roam free then? What does that mean for the country? What does it mean for the United States if every potential murderer is let out on the streets because they're mentally unstable and we want to be kind to people who are mentally unstable? Is that compassionate? Is it nice to them? No, not at all. It's especially not nice to the people they're going to victimize, but even not to them. I mean, case in point, the guy accused of murdering that young Ukrainian woman, the last phone call he made to police was not that long ago, just a few months ago. And allegedly in his call to police, he called the police on himself. And he said that he was no longer in control of himself. He was worried about himself not being able to control himself. If a person who has 14 prior convictions calls police and says, I cannot control my body, I'm worried I'm going to go and hurt somebody, is it compassionate to say, no, we're going to let you go on the streets? I don't think so. I don't think it's compassionate to him. I don't think it's compassionate to anybody he would harm. I don't think it's compassionate to society itself. What is the compassionate thing to do? Well, first off, I think 3 strikes laws maybe had a purpose. Second off, there's a reason we used to have mental institutions. It's for people like that, frankly. It is probably true that he needs mental health treatment, Mental health treatment is not letting them roam around homeless on the streets, rotting on, subway cars, and then going and murdering people. That's not compassion. That's not compassion one bit. What do you do with that? Well, how do you help people like that, right? That's why we used to have mental institutions. To Judith's point also, systemic issues are not excuses for crime. And I'd agree with you 100%. I don't think they're excuses for crime at all. In fact, I'd say that when you say a person has been victimized and the victim of a systemic problem, allowing them to go on and victimize other people will institutionalize that as well. If the narrative in the country is that institutional racism is the cause of, why people are going out and committing crimes, if you let people who've been labeled like that commit crimes, it's not going to get rid of racism. It's going to make racism worse. If you make it so that people are allowed to commit crimes based on the color of their skin because people discriminate against that person, you're going to make racism worse. And that's the other irony of where we're at in the country. I think racism was on its way out between the 90s and early 2000s. I'll point to Barack Obama himself, who, when he was being elected, again, when he was on the campaign trail, was even asked about this. He was asked, do you think this color of your skin is going to make it so that, you're not going to get elected, basically? And he said no. He said himself that he thought racism was basically done in America. And, maybe there's a little tiny bit left, but Barack Obama himself in public interviews declared that racism was almost gone. So why did they go from that to bringing it out and saying it's institutional? It's like the worst problem we've ever faced. Ironically, I'd say that Black Lives Matter brought back racism. That's the real irony. I'd say that New York Times and the 1619 Project, New York Times institutionalized racism through the 1619 Project. The real irony is that by giving the most racist people in the country a megaphone and letting them march around the street, burning down buildings, justifying murder and looting, that probably caused more racism than anything. That's how you create institutionalized racism, not by, putting people in prison. It's the real sick, upside down gaslighting that people have been subjected to in this country. We've been gaslit. The racists are the anti-racists. The sexists are the anti-sexists. The radicals are the anti-radicals. The Nazis are the anti-Nazis. I'd point to Antifa, which in almost every way represents Nazi ideology and Nazi tactics, and people who make excuses for it. People who justify political violence under the banner of fighting, political violence. What is this? What have we become as a country that we allow this? Again, we've allowed ourselves to be gaslit. I think we've been gaslit. And I believe the solution going forward is to go after that. My concern for this country is this. I've been mentioning the last few days around where we head as a country. We're going to head in one of two directions. Either people who are mad about this are going to become just like with what they oppose, or we're going to expose the people who basically propagated these entire movements. I believe that what Trump is suggesting needs to happen right now is that every institution, every media outlet, every NGO, every organization that is financed, spread, planned, and then operated these types of things across the country should be investigated and possibly criminally charged. He's talking about how the real problem in this country is that media have been framing everybody they politically disagree with as Nazis for the past decade. They've been saying, again, that white people are historically to blame for everything. And if you think somebody is guilty, what do you do to guilty people? You punish guilty people. If you believe that an entire race is guilty, what do you do to them? That's what people have been told. And I would say this is gaslighting, resulting in the most mentally ill to actually act on it. And that's what I believe we're watching. We're watching deeply mentally ill people who have been gaslit by racist and political narratives to carry out violence against the people they've been told by the media, by NGOs, by political talking heads are responsible for all the problems in society, and they are violently acting against it. That's what we are watching. And systems then that repeatedly allow them to not get prosecuted, not get thrown in mental institutions, to roam the streets, things that again have filled their heads with lies and hatred and then allowed them to roam around to commit violence. That's what's happening in this country right now. In my views, that is the problem we're facing. And so I'm actually glad that President Trump came out and made the announcement yesterday that he's going to be going after this. And again, I'm telling y'all right now, I'm launching my own investigations into what has been causing this, again, false narratives. What has been behind these hit pieces, these false framings of people, how the media institutions have defamed people, demonetized people, and whether there is a deeper political agenda behind this. I can tell you, as somebody who has personally been canceled, there's a system and common trail of how they do it. I've watched it happen to other people. It's happened to myself. I can tell you, as somebody who is a public figure, among groups who get attacked quite often, let's be honest, I'm in the political sphere of influencers, right? The conservative sphere of influencers. It's a small community. We know each other. We talk to each other. I knew Charlie Kirk. I regarded Charlie Kirk as a friend. I regarded Charlie Kirk as a friend. And a lot of us saw this coming, to be honest. A lot of us saw this coming. That when you fill people's heads with enough hatred and enough lies, they're going to act on it. We all saw this coming. And if you look at what people are saying right now, it's concerning. If you go on Blue Sky, if you go on Reddit, what do you see? You see people making additional calls for violence. You see people celebrating it. MSNBC came out and they apologized for it. But they apologized that when Charlie Kirk was murdered on live TV, the newscaster they had was, while reporting on a guy being murdered, making excuses for it, seemingly. Saying, oh, this is what Charlie Kirk said, this is what he stood for. What do you expect, right? I can tell you, as somebody who's very much a public figure, who goes around and speaks at events. I'm not speaking at like college campuses and big things like Charlie Kirk, but look, I spoke at Turning Point just recently. Charlie Kirk was there too. I interviewed Charlie Kirk there, right? It's hard to watch, to be honest. And so I'm saying right now, not out of vengeance, not out of vindictiveness, not out of anger. I do think we need to expose how this stuff happens. Because I can tell you, when I go around and talk to people just like myself, and I go around talking to people who go through this, right? We know how the system works. And this is how it works. The media, the mainstream media, they frame a false narrative. They go and interview people based on their fault. They use, this is how I'll explain to you how they do it, right? They use the scientific method applied to journalism. What is that? It means you create your conclusion before you carry out your investigation. You make your thesis, right? What is your thesis? If I were to go out and, let me step back a step. Let me tell you how journalism is supposed to work. As a journalist, the findings, the conclusion comes about as a conclusion of the reporting. You do your reporting before you come to your conclusion. Your conclusion should be an accurate representation of what people told you, of what your research demonstrated, and of what came out in the end. If you go into an investigation with a pre-formed conclusion, you're not doing journalism, you're doing propaganda. That's what the mainstream media has been doing. And so New York Times does this. This is the basis of how they do their fake, disgusting reporting. And I see them, they're one of the worst on this. They have their thesis, right? So the journalist says, I believe that this individual that a problem of racism or neo-Nazism is in the rise across the United States, and this person is responsible for it. What do? They go and talk to people around that person, and then they take quotes out of context. Epic Times, we've personally interviewed people who've been interviewed by the New York Times on some of their hit pieces, and they told us this. Recently, in fact, when we've done pieces debunking the New York Times fake coverage of Shen Yun, trying to defame Shen Yun, that's what we were told by some of the people they interviewed. They said New York Times took my quote out of context. That's not what I said. They said a lot of good things. New York Times didn't show any of it. They cherry pick the bad parts, they eliminate the good parts, and they frame a false narrative. They take all these false claims showing an extreme, only the worst parts, none of the good parts taken out of context. Not an accurate representation of what they're saying, instead, a representation of the fake narrative they want to push. Then what do? Then they go and interview experts, and they cherry pick their experts. They'll go to the expert who has a history of hating the group they're trying to defame. They'll go to the expert who has a history of also falsely representing that group, and they'll interview them. Do you believe that this is a representation of racism in America? And the person is known to already say that, and so of course they're going to go along with that fake narrative. Even then, if they don't, they'll use it to falsely frame it. They'll then go to the advertisers, the systems that basically work as the financiers, the money behind these organizations, the advertisers, the search engines, the ad networks, and they'll interview them. Why do you allow people who push hateful rhetoric on your platform? Why do you allow your advertisements to be shown alongside this hateful rhetoric? I believe they do that intentionally because they want to, again, it's a political operation. They're trying to destroy people. And so what happens? They put these advertisers and these organizations on the hot seat. Well, geez, I don't want to be affiliated with this. New York Times is saying I'm affiliated with it, and they try to distance themselves. And they'll ask them, well, are you going to continue to fund this? Are you funding hatred? Are you funding hateful rhetoric? Are you funding racism? Those organizations then back off it. And then they go to even sometimes law enforcement agencies. Will you investigate the spread of hateful rhetoric on American streets? They'll go to public officials. Are you supporting? Will you condemn this? And then you have what began as a fake narrative based again on a preformed conclusion, cherry-picked to falsely represent it, a political campaign to demonetize, deplatform, and defame, and then even politically attack the person they're targeting. I know across the board people who've dealt with this. I've dealt with it. Epic Times has dealt with it. I know Charlie Kirk dealt with it. And again, being honest, right? There's a small circle of conservative influencers. In all honesty, I'm technically, on that community, right? Speaking at Turning Point and speaking at CPAC, and we know each other. And, we talk to each other and we all deal with this. We've all dealt with this and we all know how it works because we've dealt with it. And so when we see how these mainstream outlets operate, seemingly in a purely politically motivated manner, we know what they're doing. I think the country needs to be made clear how this is happening, because aside from them targeting individuals like myself and Charlie and anybody they don't, these institutions don't like, they're also victimizing the public, because what they're doing is they're stirring up hatred. They're stirring up the public to believe in false narratives that somehow justify evil actions against good people. I'll say again, New York Times, as we speak, is doing this to Shen Yun Performing Arts. We've been trying to expose it as well, what New York Times has been doing. Shen Yun Performing Arts, again, look, started by many people who've escaped religious persecution in China, a New York-based performing arts company targeted by the CCP with death threats and bomb threats, and the New York Times is going right alongside the CCP to attack them as well, falsely framing them, sparking criminal investigations using fake narratives. We see how they're doing it. One a pure example of it, an innocent group of people being targeted through malign, fake reporting. And again, we've seen with Charlie Kirk now the result of this evil, fake reporting and what it does to people's lives. One of the best men this country had killed in cold blood in front of a group of college kids. What kind of a monster does that? You know, he was recently married. He had 2 kids. It's horrible, right? Anyways, now, you know, I'm not going to go quiet either. I'm not going to stop holding events. You know, you can't. If you were to, if good people were to fall silent because of the existence of evil people, then evil will triumph. That is how evil triumphs. If threats allow the outspoken to go quiet, you are justifying in saying that threats work, that they're effective. I believe that in the face of evil, good people should stand even stronger, not flee into the shadows and try to hide from it. I believe that when good people are threatened, they should not be shaken. They need to stand firm and be resolute. I can tell you, I'm in no way going to stop being a publicly facing individual. I'm not going to stop holding public events. I believe that I don't believe that I'm, you know, going after people and, you know, spreading by any means hateful rhetoric. I think that I believe what I stand for is truth. I'm not going to stop speaking truth just because somebody, you know, presents a threat to me. I don't believe that's what good people do. And so I believe maybe this, again, Charlie Kirk ran Turning Point, and pun not intended, but pun effective. Maybe this is a turning point for this country. Maybe it's time that we reflect on what has caused these problems, and we begin exposing and then rooting out the causes of these things. And I do believe there is an institutional cause of it. The fake news media, NGOs, organizations that are knowingly framing people, that are knowingly pushing fake narratives, that are knowingly defaming people, and that are knowingly causing waves of hatred and political movements that, again, are resulting in actual violence. I think it's time as a country that we expose this, and I think it's time as a country that we become clear in what's been happening. Again, you know, I'm going to be investigating this myself. As President Trump says, from the federal level, they're also going to be investigating it. Another question, Ashley from California saying, how do we fix the damage of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion? How do we help people through the cognitive dissonance and uncomfortable feeling of being wrong and believing a lie? Yeah, you know, it's a problem because you have basically entire generations of kids now who've been raised on that narrative. What year was the 1619 Project of New York Times? Was that like, I think it was like first, I believe it was before Trump, I think it was after Trump came into office. I don't think it was Obama, right? Or maybe it was when Obama was still president. Because again, you know, they adopted it into Common Core education. It was around that time, like somewhere between 2015 and 2017, right? And so what happened was this. The New York Times came out with a fake article, a fake series called the 1619 Project. They also did a whole series defending, was it called Red Century or something like that, reframing and praising communism. And again, praising what communism stands for, which is violent revolution, right? Communism represents violent revolution, the use of violence for political purposes. The belief that you need to, again, result to violent action to spur on political change. It's one of the banners of communism. They institutionalized this. New York Times, through the publishing of the 1619 Project, alongside their series, again, trying to praise communism, brought these things basically into the public sphere yet again. And when they institutionalized, in particular, the 1619 Project even within Common Core education. What that meant is that kids who were going to school, entire generations, have effectively been brainwashed by a false narrative. How do you undo that? How do you make it so that kids who've been taught and gone on now to college, some of them even getting jobs now in government and businesses or third-party organizations doing these types of education programs for, corporations and so on. How do you deal with the fact that there are a lot of people who buy it, hook, line, and sinker, who swallowed the whole thing? What do you do about that? I mean, it's a problem that you have some people they're convinced of a false worldview, right? And, there are a lot of people who've rejected it. There are a lot of people who might be willing to be exposed to true information that debunks what they've been taught. But a lot of people are not going to want to hear it. And so it is a problem, right? It really is a problem. On that point, too, I would say that DEI was not even just a school program or like a narrative. It was an institutional problem. So a lot of people who work in government, you would know that a lot of you had to do DEI training. You had even branches within government agencies, like offices for DEI. A lot of this was institutionalized through even executive orders over the Biden administration in particular. They institutionalized it through executive orders. If you were a police officer, or still are in this country, you would know that you've had to do this DEI training. They bring in these third-party organizations, and you have to sit there while they lecture you on diversity, equity, and inclusion, race narratives, gender narratives, and the whole 9 yards. You've been subjected to this. In New York City, they make you do it. Okay, I've had to sit through these trainings because New York, I work in New York, and New York mandates it. It's the law in the city. You don't have a choice. And then they make you check a box or something like that you went through it. So they force you. They force it on you. Everybody's been subjected to this to an extent. And a lot of people, they can watch and be like, oh my gosh, why are you making me watch this? But there are people who believe it. There are people who believe it. And so I do believe the only way we're going to turn this around is through, the purification of light itself, the light of day. You need to expose it. I believe that if we don't expose it, what we're going to have is an institutionalized problem that basically oscillates to the other side, depending on who's in political power. I believe that we need to expose the lies we've been subjected to, the tactics and methods we've been subjected to, the organizations that have pushed this. Yeah, Alfred's mom, you're saying it's brainwashing, Josh. It absolutely is. Even using brainwashing tactics, I would add. I think we need to expose it, and we need to show people the truth. And I think anything short of that will not present a cure to the affliction we've been exposed to. We need to expose it. And I plan to also help expose it peacefully and calmly and as kindly as possible, but we need to expose it. So yeah, I think that's what needs to happen. And on the point of Trump too, he's also saying that. He is saying they want to go after these. We'll see how much they can do, but they are going to go after it. Sandy Sefkic, you're saying, conservatives seem to be great at investigating and terrible at prosecuting. You're saying we get the info and then do what? Yeah. And again, part of that comes down to the courts and to the juries, right? Because if you want to prosecute somebody in the United States, you need the jury to stand with that and say it. And if you have a jury where you need relative consensus, and one person says, well, I just don't agree with them because it goes against my political views, you're not going to get a jury conviction. You did have, in fact, some of the BLM and DEI type cases that went to court, and you had members of the jury even acknowledge afterwards that they knew somebody was guilty, and they said they were innocent because of, DEI narratives. They didn't want another person of color going to prison or something like that. There were people who publicly said that. When Donald Trump was criminally charged based on grand jury investigations, there were interviews with some of the members of the grand jury, and they came out and said, well, I wanted to be the one to say, we're bringing these charges against Donald Trump. A lot of it, by their own admissions, seemed to have a political agenda behind it. And that's the problem. When the media is pushing false narratives, what happens? Well, who reads those false narratives? It's people. And if people are reading those false narratives and you need to stand trial before a group of your peers, the people of the United States, what is the chance that the people in the jury have not been exposed to this false information that news outlets are propagating? It's very little. And then what happens is the judges will oftentimes, and this has happened, they'll cherry pick the jury. And it's easy to do because there's such a divide among media. The judge can ask people, what media do you read, right? What media do you read? And if people say, well, I read the New York Times and I watch CNN and MSNBC, well, okay, you read credible media, you're in. And if you say, well, I watch Fox News and I read Breitbart or I watch InfoWars or I read the New York Times or Epic Times, they might say, well, those are not deemed accredited media. Those are deemed divisive. They'll say you're not allowed to be on this jury, right? And that's what happens. Because again, the narrative you're being fed is going to be heavily skewed depending on which media you're reading. On that note, I will add something. There was another investigation, or not investigation, I shouldn't say, analysis done on media bias. And there's an organization called All Sides. And All Sides, what they do is like blind analysis, where they have people and they're shown news articles, not knowing which media it is, and they have to say, do you believe, where do you put this on the political spectrum in terms of bias? Right-wing bias, left-wing bias, centrist, and it's a big thing like this. All Sides just did a blind study on several news outlets, including the Epic Times, and they placed the Epic Times as the most centrist media of any that they polled. They put us as center and barely to the right, very centrist, slightly to the right. Less biased than any other media on that analysis, including some of the big mainstream ones. We are affirmed now as the least biased media of all those analyzed. And how are we framed? We're framed as being alt-right, right? And so again, what happens is this: the judge can shop on narrative using which media people read. Okay, everybody who reads New York Times and watches MSNBC on this side, everybody who reads, conservative outlets on this side, all the conservative outlets, they say, well, you're not reading credible media. All of you cannot be on the jury. We're only taking these ones. And what happens? You have a jury that has only been exposed to one side of the political narrative and has been gaslit with false narratives. And those are the people who are the judge of your character, the judge of whether you're innocent or guilty. And what's going to happen? They're going to judge innocence or guilty or guilt based on the narratives they've been exposed to. I don't believe you can get a fair trial in a system like that. I believe that system is made it so you can't get a fair trial. And I think that really needs to be fixed because it's damaging our entire legal system. The way they judge shop using which media you read. And the way they jury shop doing that, right? What media do you read? Tree of Liberty, you're saying, I think one of the real questions is why these leftists are turning to violence when things don't go their way. No matter what your political beliefs are, violence is never the answer. I think it's because they're being told that violence is the solution. Case in point, right before Brown Jr. allegedly murdered this young woman on the train, and I have to say alleged because, it's the way our legal system works, right? Even though I think there is very credible, I believe he's guilty personally. I believe there's enough evidence to support that, but alleged, right? Right before that happened, What did the Black Lives Matter official account publish? They posted a video saying that basically political violence is justified, that you need to use violence to solve, the issue of race. They're saying that. If you go on Reddit and read the calls for violence, you will be shocked. Calls for violence among conservatives tends to be condemned very quickly. Any conservative calling for violence gets exposed. Media do hit pieces on them. Conservatives reject them, usually. They're very quickly exposed. Calls for violence on the left have been mostly tolerated. And I say this from an objective standpoint. Go on Blue Sky and read the calls for violence, where people after the murder, the assassination of Charlie Kirk, are saying who should be next. And they're saying Ben Shapiro, and they're saying J.K. Rowling. They're saying this. They're calling for other people to be killed publicly, and they're not ashamed of it. And they're not being deplatformed for it. The social networks are not being punished for it as conservatives would be. The media propagating it is not being called out for it for the most part. Go on Reddit groups, you see this all over the place. For some reason, it has been normalized that calls for violence are tolerated and somehow allowed on one side, but universally condemned on the other. And I'm not saying we should allow for calls for violence. I think we should universally condemn it. I don't think we should allow that at all, really, right? And so the fact that you allow it at all, and especially that it's allowed based on partisan lines, I think they should investigate that as well. Who are the moderators? Who are these organizations that allow and even publish calls for violence when it's on this side of the aisle? It is insane. It is totally insane. All right, anyways, everyone, I've gone kind of long today. Again, no episodes next week. I'm taking a short vacation. I need a short vacation. I'll be back on again the following week, and again, I'll be speaking at two events, one in San Diego, one in Orange County, the 24th and the 25th, respectively. If you want to go to those events, go to epochsd.com or epicsd.com, EPOCHSD, like San Diego.com, and I hopefully we'll see you there. Thank you so much as always. Let me know what you all think in the chat. What do you think? What do you think is allowing this stuff to happen in this country? And again, I'll see you all soon. Not next week, but the week after. And thank you so much. As always, please take care of yourselves. Stay informed and stay free. Thank you.